Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining from. Welcome to today's webinar hosted by the Recruiters Network. My name is Jason Buss. I'm the head of recruiting at Pinterest and the founder of the Recruiters Network. We're super excited to have you here today to hear more insights about plans for fall university recruiting. And before we do that, for those of you that have not participated in one of our events before, the Recruiters Network is an organization we founded 10 years ago that's focused on professional development and continuing education for recruiting professionals. And over the 10 years, we've had 40,000 recruiting professionals attend our in-person events. And while we're all sheltering in place, we've obviously adapted like the rest of the world and are focused on virtual learning for now. I am going to first want to thank Chegg, who is the sponsor of today's webinar. Many of you have likely heard of Chegg, but Chegg has advanced a lot of their capabilities tied to the topic of today in the university recruiting space, and so we're excited to hear a little bit more about that. We have a panel that will be answering some questions that were submitted prior to the webinar as people registered, as well as we'll be taking some live Q&A. So if you have questions, feel free to drop those into the chat. And we will be sending out a recording of today's webinar towards the end of the day today. With that, I wanted to pause for a minute before we kick it off and officially introduce Courtney Monk, who is on the Chegg team. And Courtney is going to share some of the data and insights that Chegg has access to that we feel strongly that everyone will be able to take some key learnings away on the information as they collect more information than you could ever possibly imagine tied to university recruiting. So Courtney, I'll turn it over to you and we'll go through some of your fascinating insights.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. I'm going to begin sharing and go into presentation mode. Does that look good? Can I get a thumbs up? Okay, awesome. You never know. Okay, well, thank you so much for being here, everyone in the audience. I'm really excited for this webinar and to hear also from the panel, because we have got a lot of experts on the panel who have amazing things to say. So as Jason mentioned, my name is Courtney Monk. I'm a director of business analytics at Chegg on our outcomes team. And we have a lot of data on students and the labor market that I'm excited to share with you today. So you may or may not be familiar with Chegg, but we have been serving students since 2005, so over a decade. And most of our products and services cater to high school and college students. And our mission is to help students succeed. And part of that mission is clearly to help students, once they're done with college, get a job, because that's why most kids go to school, is to get skills and credentials. And so we do two things in that area. First of all, we acquired a boot camp called Thinkful. And so we have graduates of that program looking for jobs. And then we also, we have a new Chegg Career Match program, which helps students with job sourcing and job placement and skills assessment. So, we're doing lots in those areas. A little bit more about Chegg students and Chegg users. The main takeaway is we've got lots of them. Millions and millions of students use our Chegg products and are engaged on our platform every day. Our students come from all sorts of majors and schools and match fairly well the general demographics of our student population in the US. So they skew a little bit female. And we also have a fair number of older students, which we know is a trend that we've seen in the education space for a while now. College students kind of going older and older. So, you know, because we've invested in helping students and we care a lot about what happens to them after they're done with school, we think a lot about the job market. And we actually have a website called internships.com, which is essentially a job board. And so we have lots and lots of data on internships and job seekers and all that. So I'm going to share some of those insights with you today. This is a simple graph of just the number of job postings that we see on our job site every week. And you can see there's a big COVID slump around mid-March, and it stayed low for a while. And there's been a little bit of a recovery in the month of June and going into July. Now, we don't really know if that's going to continue because the virus has been unpredictable and lots of outbreaks now in the U.S. So this may change, but we have seen much more activity on the job posting side in the last month or so. Now, you might be sitting there thinking like, oh, that doesn't really feel like my company. Like, we're not hiring. It's all still paused. Well, there definitely is a range of experiences depending on what company you're at. So if you're at something like an IBM, yes, there was a very steep decline in jobs posted, and there's been a pretty big uptick in the last month. Whereas if you work at a company that's more like the Salesforce experience, it's actually been fairly steady. Like, yes, there's been a decline, but it hasn't been that pronounced. And it's weathered the storm fairly well, I suppose. And then you might work at a company that's experiencing this more like KPMG, where it's been on the job postings have been on decline and they really haven't recovered. Like, they're not back hiring where you'd expect them to be. So, lots of different experiences out there, but overall, I think there has been some recovery. On the job seeker side, the people are back looking with a vengeance. This is just a simple graph of the number of job searches on Google. And so it kind of represents like a whole swath of people. And we clearly see the dip in March, and we see a really, really big uptick, and even in the last couple of weeks. So I think that the takeaway for recruiters is that there's probably a glut or maybe a backlog of people who would have been looking for jobs in the late spring and summer, but were unable to do so. And also people who are newly unemployed who are also trying to rejoin the labor market. So lots of activity on the labor supply side. People want jobs. So that's good. I think I also want to share what's happening on the school side. So as you can imagine, Chegg's business is fairly dependent on the academic calendar. It's very seasonal for our academic products. And so we actually maintain a lot of internal data on school plans, school start dates, school end dates, all these things, which affect what our students need and when. And it helps us plan for our business and forecast demand. So instead of just kind of knowing anecdotally like, oh, I think the UC system is like not going back on campus, and I heard Harvard's doing this, like we actually have data on all the schools that we collect and maintain. So here it is. This is the distribution for schools that were traditionally on campus last year. So not online schools, but just everyone, all the schools that kind of fit your traditional mold. And you can see only about a quarter are planning as of now to be on campus in the fall. And that might change, that might go down or up depending on our experiences with the virus. And about half are hybrid. So that's like where, some students come on campus, maybe like freshmen and juniors, and then the rest stay home and then they swap halfway through the year, things like that. So some students doing distance learning and some not. And then a healthy portion are completely online and may stay that way for the entire academic year. So that's the state of the world today, and it might change, but just so you kind of have an idea of what schools are doing. What that means for students is there's a lot of upheaval in their lives right now. And so I wanted to share some data from our student advisory group. So we have an advisory panel of about 1,400 students. They are interested mostly in technology jobs, but they come from various schools, they have various majors, and they're like a mix of undergrads and grad students. And we surveyed them to see like, what are you guys planning on doing in the fall? And so there are quite a large portion of them who are heading back to school, who haven't graduated yet and who are entering into their senior year probably, or their final year of grad school. And then there are a lot who will be looking for a job. They're still looking, and they're going to need to find something. And so, you know, that's kind of needs to be on your radar as recruiters, to think like, oh yeah, there is going to be this sort of wave of people coming out of the summer who will need jobs this fall. And then finally, we also asked this student advisory group, you know, what are you doing this summer? Because we know that there are students whose internships were canceled, or they never found an internship, or they didn't get a job. And so there are a very large portion of young students who are having to take online courses and getting certifications, as opposed to kind of following their plan of having an internship. So they might be doing unpaid work or volunteer work or a passion project, you know, just trying to stay busy and put something on their resume. So I would encourage all the recruiters out there to be very compassionate in your recruiting this fall. You will see resumes that don't fit the mold, where students were not able to do an internship over the summer, and you might have to kind of look elsewhere on their resume for evidence of skills and qualifications for the jobs that they're applying to. And that's really all I wanted to share today. So and I don't want to take up too much of our time, because I think our panelists are going to be awesome. So thank you very much for listening, and I will turn it back to Jason. Let me make him the host.
Great. Thanks, Courtney. Super helpful data. And I know you're going to also be joining the panel to ask or to answer any of the questions that we have on the employer side, and how you've seen things evolve both on the university side as well as the employer side. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, friend, colleague of mine, Tiffany Keel. Tiffany, take it away.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you, Jason, and thank you to the representatives from Chegg. Pleasure to be here. I am coming to you from Minneapolis, St. Paul, and I'm currently a board member for the Recruiters Network, and happy to be helping moderate today's conversation on campus recruiting and how to effectively ramp up, revise, revamp your campus recruiting programs. And with that, what I would like to do next is introduce you to our panel, and we will start with Molly Szabo.
Hi all. So yeah, I'm Molly. I'm the Early Career Talent Lead at CDK Global. So we're a technology company. We bring in between 100 and 150 interns per summer. I work out of our Cincinnati office, but we're all across the globe. So excited to be here today.
Excellent, thank you, Molly. And next on the panel, we have Rose Nakamoto.
Hi, good morning. Thanks, Tiffany. Rose here in Silicon Valley in California at Santa Clara University currently. We're a small Jesuit university, about 6,000 undergrads, about 2,000 to 3,000 graduate students. Though I've worked in most universities here in the Bay Area, so I have a background in HR and workforce development, mostly in higher education for the last 15 years. So prior to Santa Clara, I was at Stanford, prior to that, San Jose State, and then at West Valley Mission Community College District. So excited to be here and be part of the conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rose, so much for being here. And next we have Katie Everson.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I am a senior manager at Exact Sciences, and we are located in Madison, Wisconsin. I'm excited to be here. I'm also part of the Wisconsin Recruiters Network on the advisory board there, and excited to share with all of you today what we're all thinking as far as going into the fall.
Excellent. Thank you, Katie. And next we have Kristi Milbourn.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kristi Milbourn. I work for American Family Insurance. And like Katie, I too am in Madison, Wisconsin, and live here with my husband and my 2-year-old. And so I oversee campus recruitment and university relations for the American Family Insurance Enterprise. And so this summer we brought in 180 interns and 20 recent college graduates into our early career rotation programs. And I'm super pumped to be here today because I'm excited about the questions that this group is going to tackle. And I'm really excited to learn from the other panelists as well. So thanks for having me.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kristi. And we all met just a moment ago, Courtney Monk, who is the Director of Business Analytics with Chegg. She's also part of our panel. With that, we are going to dive right into our questions about campus recruiting, university relations. And the first area of focus is really going to be about diversity and inclusion, because we know that students are paying attention to how companies are responding to racial injustice as well as inequity within either organizations that they're targeting, organizations they've done internships with, organizations that their friends, parents, and colleagues work for. What recommendations do you have for how organizations can attract students knowing that this is a focus? And we'll start with you, Rose.
Thank you, Tiffany. This is such an important topic right now, and certainly it's top of mind for our students. So a couple of starting thoughts here on this topic. This summer, we hosted a series of think tanks with our students to ask them, in light of the pandemic, in light of racial injustice and the Black Lives Matters movement, what are they paying attention to as we head into fall recruiting? And number one on their list was they are paying attention loud and clear to what companies are doing, how they're responding to the workforce inequity within their organizations. And so we had this conversation with students and employers this summer. A couple things. One, I think some recruiters were very transparent to say, our company hasn't really moved the needle as far as I would like, but I personally really care about this topic. And so I would recommend for recruiters to be open to having very transparent conversations with students about your values, the values the company has. If a student doesn't ask, I would say find a way to insert the conversation of diversity and equity and racial injustice into the conversation. If and when you can, host programs that are values driven. So if you can, instead of looking at doing an information session or a career fair, organizations, career centers, or talent sources that are doing summits on diversity, or if you can plan something that's diversity focused, I would highly encourage you to do that. And even just be open with, the work that's still ahead for your organization to really address inequity. I think that's completely fine to be transparent, but I think students are looking at that. The other thing I will say is that students are putting pressure on us at the university system as well. And so just this summer, I've had a number of conversations and focus groups where students have said, I would really like to see career centers tell employers, we are only going to work with partners, employer partners that are showing a commitment to diversity. And so will you set parameters around who you're willing to partner with as a career center based on this bottom line? And so it's discussions that we're having internally as a career center at Santa Clara. How do we start to move the needle? We do have positional power as a career center, and I think this is such an important topic. And then how do we support other career centers nationwide in having these conversations? And I think it's already starting to happen.
Excellent. Thank you, Rose. And then Courtney, from your perspective, what other recommendations do you have in addition to what Rose has just shared about what organizations can do to attract candidates given the focus on DE&I?
Sure. Yeah, I echo Rose's sentiment that this is really, really important. I think in order to achieve racial justice and equity in our country, it's gonna partly come from job opportunities. And so I think one interesting little factoid to mention is that we've been following some of the data, obviously, as I mentioned a couple of minutes ago in my spiel, but we've seen a threefold increase since May, so just in the last couple of months, a threefold increase in D&I postings, job postings. So companies are out there trying to hire D&I talent. And so I think that that's a positive sign that things are starting to change and that corporate America is listening. So I will offer that up as a positive nugget. I think another couple of options that are really interesting are, so one way that a company can diversify its talent pipeline is to offer employees an employee benefit to pay down their student debt. So Chegg actually does this. They started, I think, a couple of years ago, and they pay up to $5,000 per year per person, per employee, towards their student debt. And this definitely helps to attract diverse talent. I think another example of something that a company can do is to think about alternative talent pipelines. So as I mentioned, our Thinkful Boot Camp has a very diverse student body. We have 1/3 Black or Latinx students in that Thinkful program. And that's mainly because the funding model is fairly, well, it's designed to help anyone access the program. And that means that we do income sharing agreements, so no one pays any money up front. And also we offer scholarships so that if you need to, pay rent, pay living expenses while you're in the program and you have no other source of income from, say, a spouse or anything else, then you can apply for a scholarship to help you pay for your life while you're learning these skills. So I think those are some awesome ways that you can think about looking for diverse talent and offering options for your employees that will be enticing for people from all backgrounds.
Excellent. And Kristi, from the perspective of your role as the manager overseeing campus recruitment and university relations with American Family Insurance, what are some insights you have with regard to this topic in bringing interns and early career individuals into your organization?
Great, thanks, Tiffany. And I want to just build off what Rose and Courtney said. And to start, I'd say it's so important that we acknowledge the need to speak up. So from the employer perspective, we need businesses to make the commitment to do better. I think it's super powerful what you said, Rose, that at Career Services, students are asking, we'd like to only pursue partnerships see a partnership with Career Services and employers who are committed to this work. And so at our organization, it really started with the senior leadership team, who from there, they made the commitment that, and the rest of the company has made the commitment that we're in it. We're committing to tackle the problems that are weighing down our communities today. I really love how our CEO says, doing good is good business. And so at American Family and at probably all of the organizations that are on this call today, we want the best talent and we want to offer the best benefits and offer the best company culture for that talent. And so we have to make sure that we're doing good and making a difference. And when it comes down to actually attracting talent, right? This is the Recruiters Network having a conversation about, well, what can we do on the recruiting side of things? I think we need to start by acknowledging that we all have bias and that the recruitment process itself can unintentionally make it an uneven playing field for individuals from different backgrounds. So recruiters and recruitment teams need to start thinking about where they're posting, how they're sourcing for candidates, even to how does the job description read? Could it possibly be confusing or off-putting to individuals from underrepresented backgrounds? And then we need to look at the interview process itself and start to think through, could there be certain styles of interviewing that could unintentionally create an uneven playing field for candidates from different backgrounds? And I think about those who maybe have English as a second language. And one tactic that we've used in the past is using a pre-recorded interview where we record questions and then the candidate records their answers. Is that process perhaps putting individuals with English as a second language at a disadvantage, not giving them the opportunity to rephrase or expound on their answers? And then also from the talent acquisition standpoint, we have to consider that all the way through to the selection decision. And recruitment teams and those who are making the final selection decisions need to be aware of, and they need to account for unconscious bias. And so, you know, some of the tips and tricks that I'd give for other recruiters is, you know, start to make it a priority to have unconscious bias training for all recruiters and for those who are making the selection decisions. We're also having some pretty in-depth training sessions with our recruiters on how to have tough conversations with hiring managers who are making those final selection decisions. And then another thing is start to rethink how we, the term culture fit. And, you know, if that's a real reason for either making a selection decision or disqualifying someone, we need to be really careful on what that means. And then finally, expanding where we recruit from. If we want diversity of thought and diversity of backgrounds, we can't go back to the same places over and over again. And so we're trying to focus some efforts on thinking differently about where we go for talent.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Kristi. Great insight. And Courtney, do you have a poll that you would like to share with the audience?
Yeah, actually, Tiffany, I'll jump in here. So we have a set of polls that we're going to ask throughout the webinar. We thought it'd be a great opportunity for all of those viewing the webinar to learn from each other and see what other organizations are doing as well. So on the topic of inclusion and diversity, the first poll that we wanted to ask is, given all the conversations that have been held the last couple of months, has your company increased the priority for diversity hiring specifically? So we'll just take a moment to let each of you answer that. All right, so majority of individuals have responded. As you can see, it's quite mixed between yes, we already have a budget and plans in place, roughly just over a third. Yes, we don't know specifically what we're doing yet, a third, and it's under discussion, nothing solid, just under a third, and less than 5% stating not currently a priority. So thanks everyone, and we'll come back shortly with another poll.
Excellent, thank you. And shifting from specifically talking about DE&I when it comes to bringing students in and attracting students, I want to talk now about where we're going to find those students. And Kristi talked a little bit about this in her response to the last question. But how are you thinking about the number of schools, whether it's the number itself or even which schools? So thinking about your recruitment strategy when it comes to identifying early career individuals as well as interns, how are you shifting your strategy, and how are you determining which schools and what number of the number of schools that you are calling out to and partnering with? And Molly, in your role with CDK Global, I know that you're very involved with early career talent. So I'll pose that question to you.
Yeah, so you know, I think that there's obviously some good discussion happening around bringing in more diversity to everyone's workplaces, and certainly, like Kristi mentioned, you know, going to more universities and maybe universities that you haven't traditionally visited allows us to just be in a better position to attract more diverse students. But I also think that based on what's happening in the world with COVID, it's put us in a unique position to start thinking differently about all of our strategies, right? Everything has changed. So we're all thinking through virtual recruiting for the fall. And yeah, you could stick with your core 10 schools, whatever it looks like, and you could go to their virtual career fairs. But then are you shorting yourself of all these new and exciting opportunities? So we're really starting to think about pushing our own boundaries and just changing up our plans entirely, trying new things, going to schools we would have never considered previously. You know, maybe instead of attending just the university hosted events, hosting more of our own events. So we're really starting to put a lot of thought behind that and thinking through, where do we attract this diverse talent? and where do we go that we've never gone before, that maybe it just didn't make sense when the travel was involved, the budgets were involved, but now it's a much more level playing field as far as who we consider. So we're excited about that. We haven't put together a really firm plan. We're still kind of exploring a lot of options, but I definitely think we'll be increasing the number of universities that we visit or reach out to, and engaging more students in that way.
Excellent. Thank you for that. I appreciate it, Molly. And we'll move over to Katie. So with Exact Sciences, same question. So how are you revising, revamping, or evaluating your strategy when it comes to identifying which colleges and universities are part of your program?
Yes, that's a great question. And I think just saying, adding to what Molly was saying, we want to change up what we were doing before. We want to engage in new universities that we haven't worked with in the past. And I think going a level up from that and really getting into the fabric of the universities and looking at the affinity groups and life on campus or virtually, and how we can connect with different groups on the campuses. I think too, location, we're in Madison, Wisconsin, and that may change who we are able to connect with over this next school year. Perhaps we can do a mix of on-site and virtual next year, allowing us to give more opportunities to people who might not be able to move to the Madison area and really reach new people that we haven't before.
Excellent, thank you. And I did see a participant mentioned having a tiered kind of tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, perhaps, depending on what types of positions you're trying to fill, what needs more focus. And also mentioned that they have added HBCUs to that list of universities and schools that they're targeting. So hopefully that will also add to the diverse pool of talent. And then Jason, I'll turn it back over to you for our next poll.
Thanks, Tiffany. All right. Our next question is whether or not you're confident that career fairs and virtual recruiting events will provide you with the talent and the school coverage that you need. Choices are yes, no, or unsure. We'll give it about 10 more seconds. All right. So as everyone can see, when looking at just career fairs and virtual recruiting events alone, and providing the coverage needed to fulfill your business needs, roughly a quarter say yes, a quarter say no, and more than half of the attendees on today's webinar aren't sure yet overall. Thanks, everyone.
Great, thank you, Jason. As we talk about what's going on in the world around us, and we're living at work, we're working from home, we're doing a lot of things virtually that we would normally be doing in person. We're also looking at, and it has been mentioned, we're also doing virtual career fairs or campus visits, or we're bringing students into our offices virtually. So it's kind of an obvious approach when we're talking about bringing interns in and bringing new grads into the organization. What other types of outreach do you have or have you used, or that you would recommend as you're bringing individuals into your organization, either as an intern or an early career individual? Kristi, we'll start with you.
Sure, thanks. So, actually, to build off what Molly said, my team is actually planning to do some similar responses and hosting our own career fairs and info sessions. And Rose mentioned it earlier in trying to get creative for those info sessions and not just highlighting opportunities that we're hiring for, but rather thinking outside the box in how we get in front of students and how we tell our story a little bit differently. So right now I'm working with a university in developing a panel presentation with some of our senior leaders, and we're marketing it as an Ask Me Anything series to the senior leaders. And so hoping that we'll have some fun with that. And again, just engage students in a different way. And also wanting to have information sessions that highlight who we are as an organization and as an enterprise. So topics like incorporating our stance on social justice and some of the commitments that we've made, or how we approached work during the pandemic and what that's been like, what it's like to work for our operating companies in this day and age. We're also trying to get in front of some of the professors and trying to figure out how could we maybe contribute to their curriculum, to the coursework that they're already trying to build out in this new normal, maybe presenting real world problems for the students to solve, and then working with the professors that way.
Excellent, thank you so much. And I know that there are some other perspectives on that as well. So you're on the employer side, and Rose, you're on the university side. So Rose, I'll flip the question over to you. What are some of the things that employers, from your standpoint, can do to interact and engage students?
Yeah, this is such a great question. We could spend the whole hour just on this question, I feel like, especially in this new virtual environment. And I think going back to the prior question, the challenge with career fairs and whether or not that's a viable way to source talent and help students build an emotional connection to your brand, I think this challenge and problem with career fairs existed long before the pandemic. And so what I would say is career fairs are one way for students to engage and connect, but I would say I would tend to go towards programs and career centers and sources of talent that are really looking to diversify their portfolio. So what I would say to employers, one is when you can co-create with university partners on models that make sense for you. Kristi, I love the idea of an Ask Me Anything. I think if you're finding a challenge, how do you maintain the brand, the visibility of your brand on a university campus and in the eyes of students in a lull when you're not sure about your hiring targets? I think doing recruiter and residence programs where you can actually do office hours with students, help them with their resumes, give them guidance, where you can co-facilitate a workshop or a panel. Ask Me Anything is a great way to do that. Students are by and large looking to move away from the transactional kind of recruiting experiences that career fairs have long perpetuated, where you're looking at hiring in mass and bulk. Students have to kind of line up like cattle. It's really like, I think we need to redesign that experience. And I think there's some great partners out there that are doing that right now. But that in mind, I think if whenever you can look at large scale events, whether it's a summit that you're going to host or a career fair you're going to attend at a career center or at a campus, if you can connect that with more in-person experiences virtually, where you have smaller groups that you connect with or individual students you connect with to narrow it down, students want to feel seen and heard. And so I think you need to balance a large volume within one experience with tailored smaller groups of interaction. And you can do that virtually, and Zoom is a great platform for that. I would also say that a couple of things. I would look at how do you maintain a brand during a time of uncertainty with hiring. I think there's a lot of ways you can do that. Work with partners that are wanting to see you as a partner. I think whenever employers can treat career centers and university staff as partners and vice versa, a lot can get done. I would also say I loved hearing Molly and Katie that you're reimagining your work. And I think universities need to do that as well. Our office, for example, have completely sort of drawn a clean slate to say everything we thought we knew about recruiting and about connecting students to opportunities has changed. We need to rebuild and reimagine, and we need to do that with students and employers. And so I'd say career fairs are great. I would also leverage virtual engagements. We're going to be doing a bunch at Santa Clara's Career Center, coffee chats embedded in the academies, pop-ins, meetups that are industry focused and are smaller and thematic. I would also encourage doing topical recruiting. So not just if you're hiring for computer science and you have a big company brand, that's great, but can you do topical lunch and learns around diversity, around inequity? I think if you can focus more on topics that students care about and invite them into your C-suite or invite them in to learn from others in your organization, they would love that. And then I would also say use CRMs that allow for community building. I think there's some really strong platforms out there. I'll give one example. I know Chegg, I'm really excited to see what Chegg is doing in the space, how ed tech is getting to be a player in the early talent space, because I do think a lot of change needs to happen in terms of access. Not everyone has access to a 4-year degree, but there's a lot of great talent out there. And so what Chegg is doing, I think, is really exciting. Handshake is another one. I've seen some in the comments in the Zoom chat. You can message students in Handshake. Employers can do that virtually. So I think how you can divide and conquer schools that you're going to be targeting with your own summits that you're going to be doing, make sure you find individualized ways to connect with students. They're going to be looking for that beyond the big bulk conversations you might be having virtually.
Excellent, thank you. Great insight, Rose. Molly, I'm going to move on to you, and I want to address the question about employer branding. So as we're talking about virtual career fairs, virtual interactions, we're also talking, in addition to things being done virtually, we're also talking about diversity and inclusion. So with that employer branding lens, you know, what are you doing to, or how are you using virtual tools, and how are you using your website and the engagement with students, recent grads, to now talk about employer brand and incorporate your organization's views on social injustices and equity?
There was a lot to that question.
I know, we only have so much time, so we're going to wrap it all into one question.
No, it's good. It's good. I mean, honestly, I think we have a lot of work to do. We have really, over the last few years, transitioned from just thinking about having an internship program to a more holistic approach of an early careers program. So we're still in the depths of that work of what does it look like to build your career here? And so we're having a lot of interesting conversations around that. And branding is a big one. My company, CDK Global, we used to be part of the company ADP. So we were a piece of that company that then spun off to become an independent company. So it's been challenging for us because, you know, we don't have the name brand recognition that a lot of other companies have. So I have a lot of unique challenges with my recruiting as far as, you know, I'm competing against Facebook, Google, Microsoft out in Silicon Valley. And so I have to be a little more strategic in how I approach students. And honestly, it's a lot of what Rose was mentioning. It's about building those relationships with students. It's about using our former interns to go out and spread the word of what their experience was like. I do think that our branding definitely can use some work, and that, you know, we're making progress on that. But I also think that you can't just rely on your brand. You have to rely on just building those relationships individually. So asking your team to really kind of step up their game, especially if career fairs don't exist in a traditional sense, and creating personal connections, you know, using LinkedIn and other networking tools to really build your network, I think is very helpful as well.
Excellent. And Rose, from your standpoint on the university side, what would you recommend employers consider as they're, you know, reaching out and promoting themselves, especially during times like these?
Yeah, I think that this is maybe being a big hurdle for recruiters, but I think as much as you can have conversations internally about how important is the early talent function within your organization, and if it is, I think students are going to be looking at your executive boards. They're going to be looking at diversity there. They're going to be looking at news and the media, anything about what your company is doing to move the needle forward, to make a positive impact. Students pay attention to that. And so I think as much as you can start having internal conversations for the long game about how you can be outward beyond the early talent space to create a name for what your organization stands for, and the action behind it is powerful. And that gives you recruiters ammunition when you're talking with students. I totally agree. It's all about relationships. And so one of the things I would say, this isn't rocket science, but we're trying to build a student career influencers network. So students will actually be ambassadors at Santa Clara, partnering with employers on major initiatives. These will be heads of student clubs. There's a lot of currency there. And I think once a student learns about something that you're doing, they spread it through their students. And so I think what you want to do is create sort of ambassadors for what you do. And it starts with developing goodwill with students. And so Also, relationships with career centers, I think is really important if you're targeting universities, but there's a lot of other entities, ed tech companies that are doing great programming as well. Relationships is really the currency. So with the branding piece, I mentioned this before, if you're uncertain about your targets, there's a lot of ways you can still have presence in front of students. And I think doing master classes where you have alums from different universities doing targeted focused discussions on branding, how to get your foot in the door. You can do those on LinkedIn Live. You can do AMAs. I would say have a way to be educators, put yourself in the seat of help students in the process, and be really open with imposter syndrome. I can't tell you enough how many students, especially during this pandemic, have felt like they're not worthy of the jobs they're applying for, they're not qualified enough, and no one talks about imposter syndrome. Educators don't talk enough about it. High-level C-suite people don't talk about it enough. Try to find ways to break down those barriers for students, and being open about imposter syndrome and inviting students in so they feel they have currency in the process, in the search process, will really go a long way.
Excellent, thank you, Rose. And on that, kind of pivoting just a little bit into a tangent off of those comments, we're talking specifically about colleges and universities or campus relations. Are there other options to bringing people into positions, so early career programs that aren't necessarily centered on colleges and universities? So Courtney, I'll start with you. Given your role in the work that you and Chegg are doing, what other alternatives are there when it comes to bringing talent into the organization, into entry-level roles?
Sure, thank you, Tiffany. Yeah, I mean, as I've mentioned a couple times now, Chegg has a boot camp called Thinkful, but there are many other boot camps that offer lots of kind of upskilling for all kinds of diverse talent. And because they're not a traditional path, they definitely, you'll be able to find kind of diamonds in the rough or folks that, that didn't have access to the traditional college pathway. So I think they're a really good option for companies looking for other options, especially as, you know, on-campus recruiting is increasingly like not a thing. I think what's really interesting about boot camps and even, you know, just like online certification courses through something like a Coursera, if one way to become, I think, less biased in your hiring is to focus on whether the person has the skills to do the job, as opposed to what school did they go to, what degree do they have, do I know someone who looks like this person, do they look like me, or like all of those things. And so you end up relying less on heuristics and more on really like figuring out the person's skills and abilities in a more sort of objective way. And I think that's what's really promising about these alternative pathways that makes me excited. I think one other thing to think about from a company standpoint as well is, you know, we don't all work at Google where we get thousands of people for every job opening and they're all like hyper qualified and amazing candidates, right? Like you might really have to kind of be like beating the pavement to get a talent, an applicant pool that is diverse, that you're really happy with. And so I think, you know, looking for alternatives, looking at more schools that that you maybe haven't thought about before, considering people with 2-year degrees, considering boot camps, all that stuff will actually, I think, be in your favor in that you will face less competition with other brands. You know, Rose kind of mentioned this idea of like trying to compete with other companies and hiring talent, and the wider that you cast your net, the more success I think you give yourself a chance at getting. So so yeah, I think Thinkful is obviously at the top of my mind as a Chegg person, but there are lots of things cropping up that I would really strongly encourage recruiters to consider and educate themselves on.
Excellent, thank you, Courtney. And I want to go back to Molly. So Molly, you had mentioned using Chegg. So talk with us just briefly about that experience and how it's helped you with bringing early career individuals or interns into your organization?
Yeah, so Chegg has been really great partners for us. We developed a relationship just this past year, and I communicated with them that I was having some challenges in certain areas, attracting the right talent, especially as I said, you know, we're still working on developing that brand. So they have a really great pool of candidates at their fingertips, and they also just have so much data attached to those students that they're able to really help you source in a very smart way. So through all of their screenings and all of their conversations with students, they're able to present you with a panel of candidates that you know are qualified, that you know are going to be good representation, that will be impressive in front of hiring managers. So it's a fairly new relationship, but it's been really successful for us so far. And we're in talks with them about how we continue building upon this and how we use them in this environment, right? So we talked about everything's different now, and everyone has to be a little more creative and thinking outside of the box with their recruiting. So I think Chegg is just a really good partner for us as we do that. And they're also just a good sounding board. I have a pretty small recruiting team. So I'm often reaching out to individuals on LinkedIn and saying, hey, what are you doing? Can we talk? So Chegg has been really good about connecting me with other industry leading campus recruiters, people who are doing great things out in the world. And they also just have a lot of information. So they're, you know, and they're willing to share, which is really cool. So they've just been really wonderful partners for us.
Awesome. Thank you, Molly. I appreciate that insight. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jason for another quick poll.
Yeah. Thanks, Tiffany. So question, are you open to hiring from boot camps as a talent source? So you see the choices there. Yes, but you haven't, you're open to it. You already do. Maybe you need more information or no. So we'll just give this 30 seconds. All right, just a few more seconds and we'll close the poll. Interesting results. We'll share these. So as you can see, just under a quarter of attendees from today are open to it, but have not done it yet. 9% already leverage boot camps. 61% maybe, but need more information, and 9% for no, potentially doesn't fit their hiring model. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Jason, and thanks participants in the poll. So a couple of final questions here before we reach the top of the hour. Rose, I want insight from you with regard to developing a pipeline. What are some of the things that you're doing in addition to or in place of kind of the traditional internships?
Yeah, so, you know, on the university side of things, I can share what I've seen as an interesting shift. And whenever there's like a big cultural transformation, I think we're going through that as a society for a whole host of reasons, you start to see cracks and shifts in the paradigm. And I think we are seeing that, and higher ed is under a lot of pressure. A lot of it is very reasonable. I mean, I think we need to be more affordable. I think we need to be more accessible to the greater population. And I think that's why there's such great opportunity for companies like Chegg to come in and provide alternatives for students and for non-traditional students. And so I really hope that this leads to some positive change on the higher ed side of things. So I just want to say that, you know, I really appreciate what ed tech companies are doing in the space to create alternative options for students. So we don't create internships. What I've been seeing that's really interesting in terms of some shifts is if you're an organization that, let's say it's not reasonable for you to move your internships virtual next summer. Who knows if that's going to be what you have to do. In order to continue to create a brand with students, and in order to actually, and from a social justice perspective, provide more access to opportunity. I've seen some models where it's, they're employers are creating externship programs. They're not full-fledged summer internship programs, but they're talent development programs where you can scale them virtually. You can maybe host, instead of 50 interns or 100 interns, you could host 300 interns through a series of virtual engagements with your C-suite. And the whole focus is investing in this early talent group of people. You can't offer them internships. But it's really been interesting to see URX as a group of technical university recruiters here in the Bay Area, and they've created this sort of talent development program that's all virtual, and it's an alternative for students that have missed out on internships or those internships got canceled. And so I think if you can start to think creatively about how do you develop more thoughtful externships you can do at scale virtually. Micro internships is another one that's really interesting. We partner with an organization called Parker Dewey that provides micro internships virtually. These are 19 hours of virtual projects. Hiring managers and recruiters can assign them their paid project work. Students can do it during the school year. They don't just have to do it during the summer. So how can you find alternative ways to develop visibility of your brand and to develop and support the talent of our students? And so those are just a couple of options, but I would love to see, we need to be much more flexible and open on the higher ed side. And I would love to see that across the board, we're all in this ecosystem together, right? Ed tech, higher ed, recruiters, we're all in it for students. And so how do we start to forge more strong collaboration methods that actually benefit students? So that's something I'm hoping we might see more of down the line, which is why in part I was so excited to be part of this conversation.
Excellent, thank you, Rose. And on the note of flexibility, Jason, we have another poll that we want to post for our participants here with regard to flexibility. So the question here is, do you have flexibility with your hiring managers to relax degree requirements? Yes, but it depends on the role. No, our internship and or early career hiring requirements are very strict on degree, or unsure. Give it just a minute. And you'll see the results here. Pretty good. I like that. Yes, we've got some that can relax it, some but depends on the role. Others not so much, and some unsure. But something to think about as we're looking at diversifying the talent pool, especially in those entry-level roles. And even, you know, looking at experience and potentially internships in lieu of a degree. As we near the top of the hour, just a real quick question here for Kristi. Have you made any decisions on your 2021 internship program? And if not, what criteria will you be using for that program?
Yeah, absolutely. We're definitely already thinking about it, planning for it. For lack of a better word, getting our work orders in from hiring managers and leaders who want to pursue early career talent in 2021. And so we're not necessarily thinking about whether we're going to have internships, but more so, how can we make it bigger? How can we make it better? How can we reimagine the new normal based on information and data we've gathered from this summer? And so in 2020, we were lucky enough to be able to continue our internships, and we didn't miss a beat. I know, as we talked about earlier, a lot of companies had to rescind offers or cancel internships. And so we were able to stand by our internship and our early career rotation programs for recent college graduates yet this summer. And so we delivered it in a virtual format. And in fact, we were able to increase the number of interns and recent college graduates, and by bringing them to our organization, we increased the number because we were very aware of the additional talent in the marketplace, because other companies weren't able to keep those internships. And so when we think about 2021, we're looking to expand our programs in not only internship and early career rotation programs, but we're exploring formal co-ops, and I'd love to learn more about these externships and micro internships. So we're definitely going back to the drawing board of how can we engage college students and recent college graduates and bring them to our organization.
Excellent, thank you so much. And we have Jason, if you want to please post the final poll. When do you expect your company to lock down its status on 2021 summer internships, whether it's canceled, a virtual, hybrid? It's already been decided by end of fall semester, by winter, spring 2021, or we are unsure.
Thanks, Tiffany. We'll just give this about 30 seconds. Then we have one final question we think would be helpful for everyone to answer, again, to learn what other companies are doing nationally. All right, so we'll share the results here on timing. So roughly 15% have already decided, quarter by the end of the fall semester, 20% by winter, spring 2021, and just under half still changing. And the last question we have for everyone is, do you expect your hiring for full-time internships for 2020-2021 to reduce in volume, remain about the same, increase or grow, or you're uncertain? We'll just give that another few seconds. All right. So about a quarter of the group will reduce in volume. Roughly just under 50% will remain about the same. Less than 10% will increase, and a quarter are uncertain. With that, I want to thank Tiffany and all of the panelists for the conversation today. Very insightful. And specifically wanted to thank Chegg again for their partnership and thought leadership in this space. We will be sending the recording out again later this afternoon with some additional information on Chegg for those of you interested in learning more. And I did want to call out at the top of the hour, we opened it up talking about racial justice and inclusion and diversity in this space. And I'm excited to share that we have 4 Chief Diversity Officers lined up for our next webinar. So we'll include a link for registration on that in the email with the recording. And with that, I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.